Okay, we see 9:30 here. We're in Fort St. John, so 10:30 Alberta and beyond. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Lucy Jonasek and I'm the host with Energy Safety Canada. I'm out of the Fort St. John office. Today we're presenting Cargo Securement, National Safety Code Standard 10. Our presenter is Doreen McAllister with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Enforcement Branch here in Fort St. John. Before we get started, we would like you to feel that you can ask questions that come up during the presentation. If you zoom your mouse around, depending on what kind of device you're on, you should see something that pops up as a chat thing. Then you'll be able to type in your message and we'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. And what I'd like everyone to try and do is click on the participant button on your screen. It should pop up in the lower section. And click on that and give us some feedback. You should see these options open up. Let me know if you can hear me and see my screen okay.
Good morning. It looks like the chat is disabled currently.
Chat is disabled. Okay. And you're Rick, can you help me out with enabling the chat?
Doing what I can, but I don't know how to get to it, so I'm trying.
Okay, well, we'll begin with the presentation and work on the chat feature in the background, okay? In the interest of moving along here. Perhaps at the end we can do questions verbally if we don't get the chat feature working. So I'm happy to introduce Doreen McAllister, Supervisor with the Commercial Transport Enforcement Branch of the BC Ministry of Transport. She has 21 years with the CVSE department, and before that, she had extensive driving experience with commercial vehicles throughout North America. Welcome, Doreen.
There we go. Does that work now? Okay, perfect. So what we're going to go through today is just a very brief presentation. We only have an hour, and normally the cargo securement program would take several hours or a day or two. So this is just going to be a very brief overview, and you're certainly welcome to contact me or any of my colleagues throughout North America. We actually all use the same cargo securement rules. National Safety Code 10 is federal, and it is a part of the North American Cargo Securement Agreement that was signed by Canada and the United States and Mexico back in 2004. So theoretically, all states, provinces, and territories in North America are using the exact same rules for cargo securement. Yep, not a problem.
And prior to us getting underway, we just want to advise everyone that this session is being recorded for future use and access on our website. Thank you.
Okay, so here in the province of British Columbia, we have adopted the National Safety Code Standard 10 into our Motor Vehicle Act Regulations Division 25. And for the purpose of promoting and securing road safety, subject to this act, the standard is adopted within our provincial regulations. NSC 10 applies to all vehicles that are licensed for more than 5,000 kilograms. Vehicles that are licensed for less than 5,000 kilograms still need to ensure that their cargo is properly secured in an appropriate and consistent manner. It just doesn't have to comply with NSC 10. For all vehicles, regardless of weight or the size or weight of the cargo, must be equipped and the cargo must be contained, immobilized, or secured in accordance with the applicable requirements of the division and the standard so that it cannot leak, spill, blow off, fall from, fall through, or otherwise be dislodged from the vehicle, shift within the vehicle in a manner that affects the stability or maneuverability of the vehicle. And I have just a quick poll question, if Lucy can put it up, just to quickly ask all of you folks a really quick question. So has your employer ever provided training on cargo securement? I'll just give you guys all a few seconds to answer that. Oh, that's okay. Yep, familiar with standard 10 is the same. So it looks like a majority of you are a little bit familiar with NSC 10, which is fantastic to know. So as I said, the NSC 10 is a national standard. It's actually an international standard. The international and national standard, National Safety Code Standard 10 comprises of two parts. Part 1 is the general performance criteria that all drivers of any vehicle needs to ensure their cargo is secured to. And Part 2 has some cargo specific requirements. We're not going to go through all 9 of these today, just in the interest of time. We're not going to cover logs today. If any of you are log haulers, please feel free to contact me or any of my colleagues, or you can go to the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Association website, and I'll give you that address here at the end of the presentation. Metal coils, paper rolls, and concrete pipe, we're going to kind of lump them all together because they are similar cargo securement requirements for those. And boulders, we're not going to go over in depth. A boulder is a big rock that is bigger than or weighs more than 100 kilograms and is a irregular shape and size. And why is cargo securement so important? Well, it's important so that these things don't happen. The picture in the top left-hand corner, obviously the load shifted because the straps were not tight enough. The bottom picture was obviously a liquid load. Perhaps the driver was going a little quick, or it was only a partially loaded tank and the liquid inside the tank shifted and just pulled him over sideways. One of the things that we always want to keep in mind when we're on our way to pick up a piece of freight, we want to know, obviously, what is it? Is it going to be skidded? Is it going to be skidded inside of a enclosed trailer like a van or a reefer? Or is it going to be a skidded load on an open deck? Or is it just going to be a whole bunch of miscellaneous bits and pieces that we need to consider when we're thinking about our cargo securement in advance? The other things that we need to ensure that we think about when we're loading our cargo is how heavy is it, how big is it, and we need to make sure when we do load it on the trailer or in the trailer that it's neat and tidy so that it can be secured quite easily. Some considerations that we need to think about are where are we going to tie the load to? What are we going to secure the load with? Is it going to be inside of an enclosed vehicle or on an open deck? Is the securement device or system that we've chosen going to be effective? And are we going to need some dunnage or some spacers on our load? So as I said, it does apply to all vehicles, whether they are commercial or passenger carrying vehicles. For example, a bus. That's why you need to make sure that when you're on a bus, your carry-on is secured underneath the seat or up in a secured rack or in the belly of the bus. The drivers always need to ensure that the cargo is fully contained by the structures or of adequate strength, or immobilized by structures of adequate strength that will prevent tipping and shifting, or immobilized on or within a vehicle with appropriate means to prevent tipping or shifting while in transit. As you can see, this load here obviously was loaded a little bit off kilter, and it just plain slid off. Vehicle structures, floors, anchor points, headboards, bulkheads, stakes, posts, pockets all need to be strong enough. And if any of you have ever looked at a newer trailer, older trailers have them as well, but they've probably worn off. If you ever look at the front of a newer trailer, either near the VIN plate or by the dolly legs, there's a placard that says what the working load limit or the working strength of all of the pin pockets, the winches, the hooks are all rated for. That will help you in your determination of what you need to do for your cargo securement. Your cargo securement method must be suited to the type, size, and the shape of the cargo. For example, you might not want to use chain if you're hauling peat moss, because the chain will go right through the peat moss bag, as an example. Tie downs have to be capable of being tightened by the driver, both in the beginning and as the freight is carried down the road, the driver needs to be able to tighten them. Tie downs need to be inside of the rub rails whenever it is practicable to do so. The rub rails are actually built for protection of your cargo securement. You don't want your straps to get rubbed off when somebody sideswipes you. So you have your straps on the inside of the rub rail whenever it is possible to do so. And you're going to want to think about whether or not you need to use some edge protection to protect either your strap or the freight that you're tying down from being damaged. So a big part of cargo securement is actually a fight against gravity, or in conjunction with gravity rather. We want to make sure that we're preventing our cargo, covering our cargo and preventing it from moving with at least 20% G-force up. So that could be just a tarp on your gravel or a cargo net if you've got stuff in the back of your pickup. We want to protect against 80% rearward, 50% forward, and 50% sideways G-forces. Don't be too concerned with these numbers, however. If you have the right number of cargo securement devices of the right working load limit, then you will meet or exceed the minimum G-forces. Working load limit is something that we talk about an awful lot when we're talking about cargo securement. The maximum load that can be applied to a component of cargo securement during normal service is assigned by the manufacturer. And if you look in these pictures, the top left, you can see a WLL or working load limit tag on that Kendine strap. web straps generally have either a tag or it'll be embedded right into the actual stitching. They'll use a different colored thread. Sometimes they use both. It's important to note that if we cannot read the working load limit on your strap, then we have to count it as a 0. It can be used, but it can't be used as primary securement. That center picture is the side of a boomer. The boomers all have working load limits written on them as well. That picture in the top right-hand corner, that's actually from the front of a trailer. The owner or the driver of that trailer knows that the working load limit for the chain tie downs on this trailer, it had tie downs embedded right into the deck of the trailer. Each one of those has a working load limit of 5,400 pounds, for example. The bottom right-hand corner is a chain that has a working load limit tag on it, and we can read on that tag that that chain is good for 1,635 kilograms. And if you look at the chain in the top bottom left-hand corner, you can see that little tiny nick. That nick, if you were looking at it in real life, you would see is actually a number, and it tells us what grade of chain that is. Chain is the only one, actual chain is the only one that does not have to have a working load limit written on it, and that is because we do have a formula for figuring that out, and we'll show that to you in just a couple of slides. So the working load limit of the tie down is the lowest working load limit of any of the components and the anchor points. So if the anchor point is good for 5,000 kilograms, the strap is good for 6,000 kilograms, the working load limit for the tie down is going to be 5,000 because that's the lowest of all of the components. And the aggregate working load limit of all of the tie downs to use to secure the articles must not be less than 1/2 of the weight of the articles. So if you're wanting to tie something down that weighs 5,000, you have to have a working load limit of at least 2,500, so half. And this is the chart that we use when we're determining the working load limit for chains, and it is found nearly everywhere. You can Google it. It's also on nearly the last page of the National Safety Code Standard 10, and I'll show you the link to that at the end of our presentation if you don't already have that. This is what we use to determine the working load limit on all chains. So for example, if I stop you and you're hauling an excavator, let's say, and you have 1/2 inch grade 70 chain, I know that each one of those grade 70 chains is 5,130 kilograms. So I add up how many chains you've got. Let's say you have 4 chains. That would be just over 20,000 kilograms. So the excavator can't be more than 40,000 kilograms. If you're using a snap boomer for your chains, you need to make sure that the snap boomer is tied closed, either with the tail of the chain, shoelace, haywire. You can get clips that look like oversized diaper pins, carabiner, anything. You just need to make sure that the snap boomer cannot inadvertently open while you're driving down the road. And there is nothing in the legislation, a question that I get quite often, there's nothing in the legislation that prohibits the use of snap boomers. I know a lot of you are in the oil field, and some of your customers may tell you that you cannot use them, and that is, they're the customer is always right. So that just means that you can't use them on their freight or on their sites, but there's nothing in law that prohibits you from using a snap boomer. And we've got another poll here. I'll just get Lucy to put it up. So have you or anybody in your organization ever had anything come loose while you've been going down the road? So it looks like about almost 50% of you have had something come loose while you've been going down the road. And so you know what it's like. It's a bit of an eerie feeling. I know I've had things come loose when I was driving on the highway, and I've certainly seen a lot of it since I've been working for CBSE. It does happen. We just try our best, and we know that you try your best to make sure that it doesn't happen through fault of your own. So one of the things that you need to make sure of is you have the right number of tie downs. So we know that we have to have 50% working load limit, but we also need to have a minimum number of tie downs as well, because we have to cover both weight and length. So if the piece of cargo that you're tying down is shorter in height than 5 feet, or heavier than lighter than 500 kilograms, it only needs 1 tie down. If it is 1.52 meters or less in height, and it is more than 500 kilograms, then you need 2 tie downs. If it is 1.52 meters in length, but less than 3.04 meters in length, then you need to have at least 2 tie downs. And if it's more than 3.04 tie downs, which is 10 feet, then you need 2 for the first 10 feet and 1 for each 10 feet after that. You always must secure for both weight and length. An extreme example of that would be a 7-meter piece of PVC pipe that only weighs 30 kilograms. Because it's 7 meters long, you're going to need at least 4 tie downs, because you need 2 for the first 3.04 and 1 for each 3.04 meters after that. So that would mean you need at least 4 for that 7-meter piece of PVC pipe. So as an example, if you have a box and it's 5 meters long and it weighs about 400 kilograms, how many tie downs will you need? So for all of you that thought that you needed 3 tie downs, you are correct, because you would need 3.04 would cover the first 2, and then less than 3.04 till you get to the 5-meter mark of how big this box is. That gives you 3 tie downs. So when you have cargo that is inside of an enclosed vehicle, it can be immobilized by the structure of the vehicle. So in this case, it's a dry van. And if you look at the bottom of that paper roll that's closest to us, you can see that there's some blocking and bracing in front of that roll. So that's going to prevent that particular roll from shifting or tipping. And because it can't move or tip, all of the rest of them behind it will not be able to move or tip. When you have cargo inside an enclosed vehicle, you need to ensure that it is blocked or braced if it isn't all nice and tight and tidy. Use void fillers to avoid tipping or shifting that may affect the stability of the vehicle. And in British Columbia, we use a cumulative total of 8 inches of space, or 20 centimeters. If there's more than 20 centimeters of space in between those bits and pieces that are inside your van, then we're going to want to see some void fillers or some blocking or bracing. And when you don't use blocking or bracing, you can see what happens by looking at that bottom right-hand corner. So cargo that is contained and secured by the vehicle structure often doesn't need any additional securement devices. For example, liquids in tankers, bulk solids in tankers or dump boxes, except that a tarp might be required if it's in a dump trailer. In general, freight in van trailers and containers when there are not any excessive voids. So you have a 102 trailer and you've got a couple of skids side by side. You're not going to have any excessive voids, because that's why we build the skids the size that they are, so that they fill up when they're placed side by side. Cargo that is fully contained by structures of adequate strength don't need the additional cargo securement, except, as I said before, you might need to be putting a tarp on your aggregate. If you look in that bottom right-hand corner, this gentleman honestly couldn't understand why it was a problem that he didn't have a tarp. If you look closely, there is not actually a tarp even on that trailer. Not only did he not put his tarp over, he didn't have one to put over. That gravel can very easily blow, bounce, or spill out or fall from the vehicle. And if you remember from about the second slide, number one criteria of cargo securement is it cannot blow, bounce, fall from, or fall through a vehicle. Let's say you're driving a vehicle beside this gentleman or behind this gentleman, or you're a kid on a bicycle or somebody on a motorcycle, and one of those pieces of gravel bounces out, it's going to hurt. That's why we require tarps.
Doreen, there's a couple questions on the chat there. One is, what's better, chain or straps? How do we ensure chains are correctly checked for damage?
Okay. As far as chains or straps, which choice you get, it's going to depend on what the cargo actually is. There's nothing in legislation that says that you must always use one or the other, with the exception of crushed cars. Crushed cars, you must use either chain or cable. You cannot use strap. Other than that, it's really a driver's choice. And lots of times it's going to depend on what the actual cargo is. Like I said, you're not going to put chain over compressed bags of sod, because you're just going to break that plastic, and the sod is going to be all over the place and not on your trailer. You're going to want to use straps and dunnage or corner boards. So it really depends on what it is that you're hauling, on what's going to depend whether you use chains or straps.
The other question is, where in NSC 10 can we find the chart of load dimensions and required tie downs? Do you happen to know the page number?
It's all in part 1. In section 22 is where all of the where it says how many you need. Is that what you just asked?
Yeah, it was where in it can you find the load dimensions and required tie downs?
Section 22, which is on page 10-16 of NSC 10. Is where it talks about the minimum number of tie downs.
If the cargo, as per picture on slide 21, gravel would be only up to the height of the box, is tarp needed?
In British, so the NSC 10 says that all must be secured, including the 20% upward movement. Within the province of British Columbia, we have in CVSE, so not any other law enforcement agency, within CVSE, we have a bit of a tolerance. If it is below the sideboards, so we can't see it, then it is not likely to blow, bounce, spill out, or fall from the vehicle. But like I said, that is just our own interdepartment, that's our department policy. It's not legislation. Legislation says 20% up, so that means you would have to have a tarp. But our department policy is if it's below the sideboards, we likely wouldn't insist on it, unless it's something like wood chips, which would blow out regardless of how low they are in the box.
Okay, thanks. I'll let you summarize the other questions at the end of your presentation or wherever it's convenient.
Okay. So cargo that is restrained against movement in at least one direction by vehicle structure, such as the headboards or bulkheads, you would reduce the number of tie downs by 1, but you still have to have at least 1. So if the skid or other cargo is abutted against a rated bulkhead or abutted against another piece of cargo. So if you've got 2 skids, one in front, one behind, the second one is abutted again, is touching the one in front of it, it would only need 1 tie down. The front one would need 2, but the second one would only need 1. Sometimes in cargo securement, you will hear us use terms like direct tie downs and indirect tie downs. So just a really quick definition. So a direct tie down is tied from the cargo to the vehicle. An example of that would be in integral locking devices, for example, in a garbage bin or an intermodal container. The friction between the load and the loading deck is not relied upon for cargo securement. We use the integral locking devices as direct attachments. Indirect tie downs would be where you put the tie down over top of the cargo or through the cargo and hold it down and assist the G-forces to ensure that the load does not fall from the vehicle under normal operating conditions. And important to remember that cargo securement is up to point of impact. If something tragic happens after and your cargo falls off after the incident, unless we determine that the reason for the incident was because the cargo was not secured appropriately to start with, you're not going to get in more trouble if it fell off after you crashed. And I've got another quick poll here that I'm just going to have Lucy put up. So what type of cargo do you haul? General freight, machinery, oil field, logs, or other? Perfect. So it looks like majority of you haul oil field. Some do some machinery and general freight and some other things. The oil field, I'll show you a slide here at the end of my presentation, actually has produced a really good cargo securement guide, and I'll give you some information about that at the end. So combined restraint would combine blocking and friction, or friction and direct restraint. The important part is to remember that you don't want it moving while you're going down the road. Other means could be inside of bins. The picture on the right-hand side there is bulk bins. So there's cargo inside of the bins. They are tied. They can't leave the bin, and then the bin is tied down. Another example of some other means, when you're transporting something that is unusual in shape, design, or weight. If you look closely at this picture, you'll see that there are only tie downs at the front and the back of this bridge beam. Two different reasons. One, because that is where the manufacturer wanted the driver to tie it down. There were actually load hooks embedded into the concrete. And the other reason, if you look, it's actually an expando or a trombone trailer. So there is no place to attach tie downs in the center. The important part is to remember that there are the right number of tie downs with the appropriate working load limit. So rub rails are something that are that people really need to pay attention to. I'm sure that you've all seen trailers that have rub rails that are a little bit wibbly and wobbly, and that's generally because people have tied to the rub rails in the past and it has bent the rail. So you always want to make sure whenever it is possible and practicable that you've got the hook on the posts on the stake pockets, or if you have to, put them down onto the frame, and you always want them inside of the rub rail whenever possible so that the strap or chain doesn't get damaged or hit when somebody sideswipes you on the Highway 2 between Calgary and Edmonton. So single articles of cargo are fairly easy. It's the pallets of miscellaneous things that make it a little bit more complicated sometimes. But what you can do is you can unitize that skid of freight by some banding. That heavy duty poly that lots of places use will make it one article and make it a lot easier to tie down. And that way, that'll make that skid of brick, for example, much easier to tie down. If you look in these two pictures, the picture on the left, he's got some boards tied together with some old straps, and that's unitized the load. The picture on the right, he's got some corner boards that he's using to unitize that brick, plus it was poly wrapped. So that way it's just one skid rather than 18 pieces of brick that you're trying to tie down. When the articles are round, that's when you need to make sure that they're really ensure that they're blocked and braced. So this would be for the pipe and the paper rolls, coil rolls. You want to put some blocking or bracing on the bottom to prevent it from rolling. And this is one of the times when we do want to see a 45-degree angle on your chains. Straps generally aren't going to be used on this type of freight, and that's just because it's too easy for the straps to get damaged, and also they might not be heavy enough depending on what it is that you're hauling. Chains are just sometimes easier with these types of things. But you're going to want to put some corner boards or some edge protection. In this example on the right-hand side, the edge protection is actually protecting the freight, not the chain. You don't want to damage your client's product that he's paying you to haul. Edge protection is you're going to want to use edge protection to prevent abrading of your straps. It can be anything. It can be what is used in these examples. The one on the right-hand side is actually some old straps that have been folded up. You can use carpet. You can buy those plastic corners or those metal corners that go under your straps. Anything at all that will prevent your straps from getting cut while you're going down the road or when you're tightening your load. Tie downs need to be able to be tightened, obviously, and the driver must be able to tighten them when he's en route. Tension requirements do not apply to steel strapping because, of course, those are fused together. The steel strapping is only going to be used for unitizing cargo anyways. It's not the primary means of cargo securement. So the driver needs to stop and check his cargo securement at fairly regular intervals. Within the first 80 kilometers of his trip, he needs to stop and check and make sure everything is still the way it was when he left the yard. And then at each change of duty status, after 3 hours of driving or after 240 kilometers, the driver needs to stop and check all of his cargo securement. Make sure the load is still not falling off his vehicle or out of his vehicle. There are a couple of times when a driver is not required to. One is if they're hauling an enclosed vehicle, a container or a van or a reefer, and it has a US or Canada customs seal on it, then the driver is going to be prohibited from actually opening that seal because of immigration or freight rules with customs. Or if the inspection is impractical. For example, you're in a tank, you're hauling a tank. So that concludes all of part one. The next few slides are cargo specific commodities. So the first one that we're going to look at a little bit closer this morning is lumber, which is section 46 in the NSC 10. So bundles that are carried in 2 or more layers and placed directly on top of each other or on spacers shall be secured with tie downs over the top layer of bundles. With at least 2 tie downs if they are longer than 1.52 meters. And if the stack is higher than 1.85 meters, then you're going to be required to have some more tie downs. So you have 2 lifts of lumber, or in this picture, there's 3 lifts of lumber and it's less than 1.85 meters. So it's just general cargo securement requirements of 2 within the first 3.04 meters. However, if you look at this picture on this slide, there's 3 lifts of lumber So the bottom two lifts are tied, and then the top lifts are tied as if the other ones weren't even there. If there are spacers used in between the lifts, need to ensure that the spacers won't compact, and they are at least as long as the freight that they're spaced. So for example, you wouldn't want to have spacers underneath of this, it looks like 12-foot lumber. You wouldn't want to have spacers underneath these lifts of lumber that are only 8 feet long or wide or whatever. It needs to be from one end to the other or from one side to the other if there are spacers being used. So intermodal containers, otherwise known as CCANs to everybody else, are reusable and transported generally on container chassis, but not always. If you are hauling it on a container chassis, all four locks must be fully engaged. For the majority of you folks here today, you're probably hauling lots of these intermodal containers on open deck trailers, flat decks or step decks. Need to ensure that all four corners are fully supported by the vehicle if it is loaded. If it is empty, a maximum of 1.5 meter rear overhang is permitted. And if they're on an open deck trailer, they need to be secured by chains or wire rope on all four corners, or if you are tying to the top four corners, and I don't believe I've ever seen anybody tie to the top corners, then that's one of the few times where cross-chaining is a requirement. This gentleman here was actually stopped at the Puskupi inspection station, and that was about 4 meters rear overhang, and it was a loaded container. He couldn't quite understand why we had a problem with that. So Section 88 of National Safety Code Standard 10 is where we start talking about vehicles. So light vehicles or automobiles that are less than 4,500 kilograms must be secured with at least 2 tie-downs at the front and the back, and they must be direct tie-downs. So they have to be from the vehicle to the deck of your trailer, which is why this red car is a tie-down violation, because that's not a direct tie-down, it's an indirect tie-down. It's going over the vehicle rather than attached to the vehicle. So the tie-downs must be attached to the vehicle, to the mounting points that are specifically designed by the manufacturer for that purpose. If they are using the wheel socks, then they must also provide lateral, longitudinal, and vertical cargo securement. Heavy vehicles are Section 89 in the NSC Standard 10, and they're for any vehicles that are more than 4,500 kilograms. And they include machinery that operates on wheels and tracks. They need to be secured with at least 4 tie-downs, and each one of those tie-downs must have a working load limit of at least 2,268 kilograms. The tie-downs are at the front and the rear or on the mounting points designed by the manufacturer. A lot of heavy equipment has actual load hooks built right onto them by the manufacturer. Any accessory equipment must be completely lowered and secured to the vehicle. And if it has articulation point, like the front end loader in the left-hand side or a rock truck, that articulation point needs to be locked with the pin. Or if the pin has been lost or it's missing, there isn't one, then you need to put chains through that articulation point. You don't want that piece of machinery bending on you while you're driving down the road. Crushed cars are flattened cars, so they're not the cubes, they've only been flattened by mechanical means, and they're on their way to the recycling place where they're going to strip them and separate them out. Web strapping cannot be used on crushed cars. It must be chain or wire rope. Each one must have at least a working load limit of 2268 kilograms. And there has to be at least 4 on each stack. And then there has to be netting or some other device surrounding the load to ensure that debris doesn't fly off while you're going down the road. Sections 94 to 96 of the National Safety Code Standard 10 are for roll-on and roll-off and hook lift bins. They have to be secured at the front with either the lifting device or the stops, and at the back within 2 meters of the rear of the container, they must have 1 indirect tie down or 2 tie down secured to the side rail of the vehicle chassis and the container chassis at the same time, or 2 tie downs lengthways securing the container to the vehicle side rails, or the 2 hooks that you'll see them a lot on garbage bins. There's actually hooks at the back of the truck that hook onto the bin. So I've got another quick poll here for Lucy to put up. So it looks like the majority of you guys are safety officers. There's a few other, which is probably owner operator, I would imagine, and a couple of drivers as well. So those of you that are safety officers, there's definitely a lot of material that I'll share with you here in just a couple of more slides that you can share with all of your staff and drivers. These are quite obvious. Fellow on the left-hand side could not understand what was the problem with the load. That center picture is some boulders, and that's a cargo secure specific requirement of how to chain the boulders down. And you can see on that steel reel, he's got his chains forward and backward at 45-degree angle, and then he's got some blocking underneath to make sure it doesn't roll. So for all of you that are, that said that you did a lot of oil field, if you happen to be a member of PSAC or CAODC, you can access this document. It's a copyrighted document that's available to all the members of those 2 organizations. And it's an industry best practice for cargo securement. And it actually exceeds the minimum standards of NSC 10. And one of the better things about this document is it has a lot of photos and examples from all over northern BC and northern Alberta. And the last I looked, there were about 100 different companies that were signatories on this document when it was originally written in 2006. So there's lots of information on our website, cvse.ca. If you go to there, you can click on the National Safety Code Standard 10 document right from there. Also, if you go to the CCMTA website, Canadian Council of Motor Transport Association, they actually have a lot of information on there and all of the National Safety Code standards, including Standard 10. And if you click on the link for the Standard 10, there are also, I think, 4 different documents that have frequently asked questions and some interpretation guides as well. So if there are any questions, I'm just going to change to a bunch of pictures while I answer any questions that any of you may have.
In the chat, Doreen, we have, when we look at tank trucks, does the hose caps and valve caps fall under load securement?
Yes, they do. So they need to be secured with the clip or with a chain. And also the hoses that are in the tray along the side, those hoses need to be properly secured. if they're a fully enclosed tray, you can just have small chains that are would cover the 20% up. If they're in an open tray, then they need to be properly secured. Because they're lighter, they can just use those light little 1-inch motorcycle straps if they're just holding a couple of hoses on a side.
Does cargo securement apply only on highway or any road?
Any road at all includes cargo securement. It is a North American component. PDRs are a little tiny bit different because they're kind of a private road. However, if there is an incident, your insurance company may say that because you weren't following cargo securement regulations for the highway, they may or may not cover you when you're on an industrial road. But on all public roads, cargo securement rules do apply.
I think you might have covered this one already, but how often does a driver have to check the straps?
Within 80 kilometers of initially loading the load, and then once every 3 hours, 240 kilometers, or change of duty.
On intermodal containers, how do you secure the contents inside?
The same as you would inside of a van, blocking, bracing, shoring boards, void fillers, exactly the same way. It becomes tricky for from the driver's point of view when it does have a customs seal on it. They have to trust that the folks that loaded it did it properly. But otherwise, it's inside of a container. It would be exactly the same as inside of a van or a reefer.
Someone's asked, will the presentation be available for us to access after today? The intent of Energy Safety Canada is to post this on our website, and possibly Doreen has provided us with the presentation material, which we can probably circulate as well.
Yep, yeah, I'm going to be leaving a copy of the presentation with Lucy, and Energy Safety is certainly welcome to share it, with the caveat that this is BC's interpretation. The pictures that I'm showing you right now are all pictures that we have taken within the Peace District. And then the pictures on the slides were actually, majority on this, the pictures on the slides were Google image search. I just want to point out this picture here that you're seeing right now real quick. It's something that I forgot to put into the presentation. The second container on this trailer is not 50% on the vehicle, at least 50%. This isn't an intermodal container. I thought it was or it is an intermodal container. And there's hardly any of it actually on the trailer. If you look, it's just barely, it's only about 4 feet of 20 that is supported. You need to doesn't matter what piece of cargo you have, at least 50% of it has to be on the trailer. And if it's an intermodal container and it's loaded, it must be 100% supported by the trailer. If it's empty, it can only have a maximum of 1.5 meter overhang, cumulative overhang. Just something to keep in mind when you're loading freight.
For trailer or cargo anchor points, if there's no rating or placard, is a rating assigned?
On the anchor points on the trailers, what we would do if we can't find, if we feel the need to look and we can't find that sticker or embossment from the trailer manufacturer, what we'll do is we'll go to the trailer manufacturer's website to see if we can find what it may have been when it was produced, or if we can find the line sheet. Honestly, the only time we're going to be looking for we're going to be investigating that much is if there is some obvious deformity or damage to the anchor point on the trailer. We're more looking, because we know what those are rated for from the trailer manufacturers already. We're more looking at your straps and chains and boomers to make sure that they're rated.
Are the standards available online, or does one have to purchase them?
Nope, the standards are available free online. If you go to ccmta.ca, Canadian Council of Motor Transport Association, or if you go to our website, cvse.ca, National Safety Code Standard 10 is available. You can probably Google it as well. It's one of the standards that is free. All of the National Safety Code standards are free.
Is cargo securement requirements only for commercial vehicles, or are farmers and landscapers supposed to be following them as well?
All vehicles that are over 5,000 kilograms licensed weight must comply with NSC 10. If they are less than 5,000 kilograms licensed gross vehicle weight, then their cargo simply must be secured from falling, bouncing, blowing off of, shifting or tipping in the vehicle during normal operations.
Now, the last question on the chat screen is, in your experience, how many cargo securements are done right versus wrong?
I would say the majority are done either exactly correctly or mostly correctly. The oddball ones are like this one here. He simply got busy and forgot to throw a strap over that pallet that was in the middle of the load. He had all of the rest of them right. Majority are done correctly, and lots of times the problems that we find are a strap was cut in transit, or the chain came loose since the last time he stopped. The reason why I've paused at this picture is I want to show you the next one. So these are railroad axles, and he did have them blocked, but the blocking became loose. And when the blocking became loose, the axles rolled. And if you look, this is actually the front of this person's trailer, and that railroad axle actually fell off of the front of his trailer and landed on the fuel tank of the truck. Very, very important when you're hauling something round to ensure that the blocking or bracing that you're using is strong enough, and the driver is checking it regularly, as well as the straps and chains, to make sure that the cargo can't roll.
So what are the major issues you see with cargo securement?
This one right here. Once a day, we see a hammer or a snipe or a pair of gloves or a pair of boots. That's the most common. The second most common is not so much in cargo secured incorrectly as just things have come loose or shifted. This picture here is not actually cargo securement. I just wanted to point it out. The driver couldn't actually open his door because that pipe, when he loaded it, made it so he couldn't open his door. Another really common one that we find, this one, the load was not unitized properly. So these bags actually fell off of the pallet. They're still inside the plastic, but that's the only thing holding those bags onto the trailer. So the loads that are unitized with that plastic are sometimes a challenge, just because they will shift in underneath of the straps and then they fall out.
What are the fines for improper securement?
Well, it's an out of service on the National Safety Code. It's in British Columbia, it's $288 fine for driver of a commercial vehicle and $173 fine for the driver of a private vehicle.
Okay, that is all the time we have for questions today. I'm just going to remind everyone that we have a few other webinars coming up, and let me just get back to them. We have later today, very soon after this workshop ends, workplace exposures, and we have for core holders safety program companies working on their safety programs, workshops on formal hazard assessments, fit for duty, and one on how to submit your C-Corps audit online. Everyone will be getting a survey by email. We'd love to know how we're doing and how we can improve. And we'd love to know what topics you'd be interested in seeing webinars on. During this time of restricted access to classroom sessions, we're planning to continue offering webinars. So send your ideas in and we'll see possibly we can accommodate your request. Thanks again to Doreen McAllister. This video will be posted to our website and everyone who registered will be notified when that webinar recording is available. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.